Have you ever wondered if love must be bound by blood to be real? Do you believe that only a piece of paper gives someone the right to be called mother? There are people who didn't give birth to us, but stayed when the world turned its back. There are arms not made of shared blood, but they hold us with unconditional tenderness. This is the story of a woman who sat silently in the last row of the courtroom. No one knew who she was, until the defendant stood up and called her by a name that left the entire room in stunned silence: Mother. And if you've ever believed that, family isn't where we were born, but where someone chooses to stay until the very end, then this story is for you. Before we begin, please like this video and comment below to tell us where you're watching from. Your support is what keeps us going, bringing you more powerful, soul-stirring stories like this one. Let's begin. The morning at Fayette County Courthouse began like any other. Sunlight streamed through the high, arched windows, casting a faint golden glow across the worn stone floor. In a space thick with the scent of polished wood and aging paper, every footstep, every creak of the wooden benches echoed like time itself had begun to slow. In the very last row, Loretta Sinclair sat in stillness. 58 years old, her slender hands rested neatly atop an old handbag. She wore a navy cardigan over a pale gray dress. Her silver hair was tied into a neat bun. Her black flats made no sound when she moved. No one paid her any attention. No one bothered to ask who she was, but she knew exactly why she was here. At the front, seated at the defendant's table, was a young man, tall, slightly hunched with a solemn gaze, Elijah Brooks, 28. His faded gray shirt had the sleeves casually rolled, the top button undone. Surrounded by people, Elijah still looked like he was entirely alone. He didn't turn around, didn't glance, didn't recognize anyone. But Loretta saw everything. She saw how he clasped his hands tightly together as if holding something back. Saw how his shoulders stiffened every time the gavel struck. Saw how his eyes avoided everyone, especially the back row. For nearly 30 minutes, Loretta didn't move. She didn't check her phone. She didn't ask for the time. She didn't speak to anyone. She just sat there, straight-backed, motionless, like a quiet monument in a courtroom full of chaos. That woman, with the contemplative face and a small handbag resting in her lap, no one knew her name. But she knew the name of the man on trial, and once she was the first person who ever said that name with love: Elijah. His name is Elijah Brooks, 28 years old, hair neatly trimmed, eyes clouded as if they had lived too many years in silence. He sat there, in the middle of a criminal trial at Fayette County Courthouse, charged with aggravated assault against a man named Brian Mallory in a parking lot. According to the case file, the victim sustained a fractured cheekbone, a dislocated left shoulder, and a partially cracked rib. Elijah didn't deny it, and he didn't make excuses. His court-appointed attorney, a young woman named Rachel Connors, tried to explain that this wasn't a senseless act of violence. But Elijah refused to say what had really driven him to act. He simply stayed silent. And that silence painted him in the courtroom's eyes as something dangerous. A ticking time bomb, an unstable man prone to violence, someone with a prior record for disturbing the peace a few years back, when he was living in a temporary shelter on the city's south side. But no one in that room, except Loretta, knew the truth. No one knew that on that day, Elijah had witnessed Noah Mallory, a boy about 8 years old, being grabbed by the collar, shoved into a car door, and slapped so hard by his father that his nose bled. No one knew that Elijah had stepped forward, tried to intervene. And when Brian turned and raised his hand to strike the boy again, Elijah couldn't hold himself back. One punch, a body hitting the ground, and a chain of consequences set in motion. But Elijah told no one about any of it, because he believed, I'm the guy who's already been arrested, the one who's already failed. Who would believe me? No one. In the courtroom, Loretta didn't hear every detail. She couldn't catch all the exchanges between the lawyer and the judge. But she saw what no one else did. The way Elijah's hands turned pale from how tightly he gripped them. The slight tremor in his right knee every time the word charges was mentioned. And that look in his eyes. Not the gaze of an aggressor, but the gaze of a wounded child hiding something to protect someone else. Loretta knew, because she had seen that look before. On a rainy night, 17 years ago, the memories returned like the first winds of autumn, gentle yet cold, lingering and deeply real. Loretta Sinclair still remembered the day that child first walked into her home. Elijah Brooks, only 11 years old at the time, was brought to her late on a rainy Friday afternoon by a social services worker. The rain poured hard, hammering her porch roof like a heartbeat in panic. Elijah stood at the doorway, drowned in an oversized coat, pant legs soaked, dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept in a week. He said nothing, no greeting, no tears. The social worker simply stated, "This boy doesn't talk much, doesn't connect well. He'll stay here until we find something more permanent," and then left. Loretta didn't ask many questions. She simply knelt down, placed a dry towel in his hands, and gently said, "There's cornbread in the kitchen. Eat it while it's still warm." He didn't respond, but that night Elijah didn't sleep in the room prepared for him. He sat curled in a corner, eyes wide open almost all night. Near dawn, Loretta entered quietly, placed a blanket over his shoulders and sat beside him. "No one here is going to make you say anything," she said softly. "Just breathe. That's enough." The weeks that followed weren't easy. Elijah barely ate. He hid dry bread under his pillow, locked the bathroom door twice when showering, flinched at the sound of trucks outside, but Loretta didn't scold. She didn't press. She was simply there, like the rising sun each morning. She made pancakes on Saturdays. She folded his clothes carefully, leaving little notes. "It's chilly today. Wear something warmer." She left a pencil sketch of a cat outside his door, drawn by her own hand, just to see if it might coax a smile. A month passed. He still hadn't called her anything. But one night, as a storm howled through the window, Elijah quietly stepped out of his room and curled up at her feet, where she sat knitting on the sofa. He didn't say a word, just tucked himself by her legs, like a frightened kitten seeking familiar warmth. Loretta didn't ask what's wrong. She didn't hug him, didn't do anything grand. She simply laid a soft blanket over him and kept knitting, humming a quiet lullaby from long ago. From that night on, Elijah began to change. He was still quiet, but he'd nod when she asked questions. He finished his meals and washed the dishes afterward. Then one day, as Loretta was rummaging through the medicine cabinet, she heard him murmur softly as he passed her by, "Ma." It was unclear, Mom, or just the wind in his breath. But she knew. That child had opened his heart. Not with a signature, not with paperwork, but because someone stayed long enough and patiently enough. People often say, if you love something enough, you'll fight to keep it at all costs. But sometimes, life doesn't ask what you want. Elijah had been with Loretta for nearly a year of quiet dinners, long evenings watching old movies, and Sunday mornings when Loretta made pancakes, exactly the way he liked them, slightly burnt on the edges. He had started to draw again, started to smile, just a little, started calling her Ma, but only when no one else was around to hear it. Then came his 12th birthday. Loretta gave him a navy blue hoodie with a big front pocket. Elijah wore it for a week straight, carefully sticking cartoon stickers along the sleeves, like a child who was finally allowed to just be a child. He made her a birthday card, cut and pasted from old newspapers, with a clumsy, crooked message. "You didn't give birth to me, but you gave me a life." Loretta still kept that card to this day. And then, just 4 weeks after that birthday, the call came. Cold, mechanical, from Child Services. "We're calling to inform you that Elijah will be relocated to a relative, a distant cousin named Henry. The file was delayed. Apologies for the late notice." Loretta froze. "Number no, that's not right. I'm the one raising him. He's doing well. He doesn't need to be moved." But the voice on the other end responded, detached and scripted. "The file shows blood relation. That takes priority. We are required to proceed by law." She had 3 days. In those 3 days, Loretta wrote handwritten letters, sent emails, made phone calls to every office she could find. She showed up at government offices in person, holding pictures of Elijah tending the garden, bringing his notebook full of poems he'd copied, trying to prove that love, not blood, is what makes a family. No one listened. No one responded. No one cared about a black woman living in a worn-down middle-class neighborhood with no lawyer, no powerful relatives, no voice inside the system. Friday morning, Elijah sat on the stairs, wearing his blue hoodie, his hands gripping the straps of his backpack. He didn't say anything when the caseworker arrived, didn't ask why, didn't cry. He just looked at Loretta, once, quickly, then turned away. Loretta tried to smile. She had promised not to cry, but her hand trembled as it brushed his shoulder. "Make sure you stay warm, okay?" Elijah nodded, and then the door closed, a soft sound, but to Loretta it was like the crash of an entire world collapsing. That boy, the one who once called her Ma, vanished from her life on a morning that didn't even allow a proper goodbye. She stood in the kitchen the entire afternoon, staring at the still warm plate of pancakes on the table, and in her heart something had been taken, not by violence, but by policy. People often think the most painful moments are when something is taken from us. But for Loretta Sinclair, what she could never forgive herself for was the one time she didn't open the door. Years after Elijah had left, Loretta kept the same routine. She still made pancakes every Saturday morning, though no one was there to eat them. She still placed flowers in the small vase by the window, the spot where Elijah once kept his coloring book. And each night before bed, she would open the drawer beneath her vanity and take out a photo of Elijah at 12, wearing his blue hoodie, standing in the garden with that shy, uncertain smile. And then, one day, when Elijah turned 18, she saw a familiar figure across the street. A dark jacket, tall frame, but those same slightly hunched shoulders, that slow, hesitant walk. It was Elijah. He stood at the gate, didn't knock, just stood there, gazing at the house in silence. Loretta saw everything. She stood behind the sheer white curtain in the living room, clenching her hands so tightly her nails dug into her skin. Her heart pounded, her breath quickened. It had been 6 years. She had dreamed of this moment countless times. She had told herself, if he ever comes back, I'll run to him, hug him, say I'm sorry. But when it finally happened, she did nothing. She stood frozen, didn't move, didn't dare step outside. What if he resents me? What if he came to ask, why didn't you fight for me? What if his eyes say, I hate you? She was afraid of the answers, afraid that all the love she had given still wouldn't be enough. Elijah stood there for about 3 minutes, then turned and walked away. Loretta sank to the floor the moment the iron gate clicked shut behind him. She buried her face in her hands, not crying, just hollow. A tightness filled her throat, as if she had just lost something precious, for the second time. From that day on, she never told anyone about it. Not her friends, not her pastor, not even herself. In the quiet prayers she whispered each night. Only the photo of Elijah in the garden remained, the sole witness to the guilt she carried for 10 long years. A guilt no one ever forced her to bear, but she chose to keep because she knew, I was the one who didn't open the door. The air in the courtroom remained just as heavy. The high ceiling, the cold white lights pouring down on rows of wooden benches made everything feel submerged in a pale, ghostly haze. Spectators murmured quietly, adjusted collars, flipped through files resting on their laps. But in the back row, Loretta Sinclair sat motionless, still as stone. Her hands rested on her handbag, the same one holding the photo she hadn't dared to look at for more than a second. Since the day the boy in that picture vanished from her life, and then a figure approached, poised, confident. The soft click of heels echoed gently across the worn stone floor. Attorney Rachel Connors, early 30s, in a deep navy blazer, name tag pinned neatly to her chest. A professional face, but her eyes were young, carrying the uncertainty of someone still unfamiliar with things that don't appear in legal documents. She leaned down and asked gently, voice soft as if afraid to intrude, "Excuse me, May I ask who you're here for? Loretta looked up calmly. Her dark brown eyes met Rachel's, not cold, but still. Like a deep lake without ripples, yet beneath it you could feel the current. Rachel blinked. She continued, I noticed you've been here since the beginning and no one seems to be with you. I just want to make sure you didn't walk into the wrong courtroom. This is a criminal hearing for Elijah Brooks. If you're looking for a civil matter, it might be… She hesitated slightly, lowered her voice. The next room over. From a few rows ahead, some women in trench coats turned their heads. No one said anything, but their glances held unspoken questions. Who is she? A relative of the defendant? Doesn't look like it. A caretaker, a cleaner, a janitor? Loretta didn't answer right away. She looked at Rachel, eyes steady and unblinking, then tilted her head slightly and smiled, a small smile, but one that carried a weight the young lawyer couldn't explain. Finally, Loretta said, I'm exactly where I need to be. Just one sentence, software, but enough to make Rachel stand upright. She gave a flustered nod. Yes, I understand. Then she turned and walked away. But after only 2 steps, she stopped, glanced back. As if something inside her had just been stirred. Loretta turned her gaze forward again. Same seat, same figure, the back of Elijah Brooks. She didn't need anyone to know who she was. She didn't need to explain, because she had already run once. And today, she would not do it again, not anymore. Amid the rustling of papers, the rhythmic tap of the judge's gavel, and the steady monotone of legal readings, the morning in court continued, steeped in a particular kind of stillness. Not the stillness of peace, but the kind held taut like a string about to snap from the tension. After more than an hour of arguments, Judge Malcolm Avery called for a 20-minute recess. Attorneys stood, speaking quietly. The clerk left her station. Spectators took the chance to step out for water. The courtroom began to stir. Only Loretta Sinclair didn't move. At the defendant's table, Elijah Brooks remained seated, head down, hands clasped, face nearly expressionless. And then, in a moment so brief it could have been imagined, his eyes flicked toward the back of the room. Just a glance, quick, fleeting, then gone. Loretta saw it, no one else did, but she did. And in that fragile instant, she recognized something cracking behind those weathered eyes. Not coldness, not anger, not indifference, but a flicker of recognition, a question unspoken, a memory not fully gone, slowly rising from somewhere it had been buried. Elijah immediately looked away, as if he'd been caught doing something he wasn't supposed to. He shifted in his seat, tapped his fingers on his knee, trying to steady his breathing. But Loretta knew. She knew that rhythm. That's what young Elijah used to do when he was nervous, before handing in a drawing or when strangers came too close. Even though he was taller now, older, more composed, that little boy was still there, just grown up in a suit of armor called adulthood. Loretta didn't take her eyes off him again, not to force him to look back, but to speak the only way he had ever truly trusted. Through her gaze, she told him, I'm here. And this time, I'm not walking away. When the courtroom reconvened after the recess, the atmosphere felt different. No one said anything aloud, but something had shifted. Subtle, yet unmistakable, as if the entire room was waiting for something to happen, even if they couldn't name what it was. Elijah Brooks stood when asked to speak before sentencing. Attorney Rachel Connors leaned over to whisper something, but Elijah only nodded slightly. His eyes fixed on the table for a long moment, as if wrestling with something inside. Then he looked up, slowly, not at the judge, not at his lawyer, but straight toward the back of the room, where a woman sat as still as a statue, silver hair, handbag on her lap, and eyes that hadn't looked away from him since the very beginning. Elijah swallowed hard. His voice was rough and low, but each word came out clearly, as if pulled from somewhere buried deep. I know I'm not a good man. I've done things I regret. And I used to think I was abandoned. By my birth parents, by the people who fostered me, by this whole system. He paused. His eyes never left Loretta Sinclair. But when I was a kid, there was a woman. She made pancakes every Saturday morning. She never pushed me when I stayed silent. She just sat beside me and sang while folding laundry. In the front, Judge Malcolm Avery leaned forward slightly, his expression beginning to shift. A few whispers stirred among the middle rows. But Loretta didn't move. Her body was still as ever, only her hands slowly tightening together. Elijah went on, his voice beginning to tremble like a wire pulled taut. I didn't understand it back then. I thought it was temporary. But now I know it was home. It was safety. It was a kind of love I didn't believe could be real. He bowed his head, then raised it again. This time his eyes were brighter, though lined with tears. She didn't give birth to me, but she gave me a life. And if she's still willing, I need her. I need my mother. The courtroom froze, not a sound. Some forgot to breathe. Attorney Connors slowly set her pen down. A court clerk instinctively placed a hand over their chest, as if holding back something rising. Judge Avery leaned back slightly in his chair. His glasses slid gently down his nose, and his eyes found Loretta, still seated as she'd been from the beginning. But now her eyes shimmered with light. Elijah sat down, as if afraid another second standing might break him apart. But what needed to be said had been said, and for the first time in many years, the word mother had been spoken again. After Elijah sat down, the courtroom remained silent. No coughs, no pages turning, no pens tapping on desks, just stillness. A stillness thick, but not frightening. It was the kind of stillness that lingers right after the rain, just before the first ray of sun breaks through. In the back row, Loretta Sinclair still sat perfectly still. Her hand rested on her handbag, trembling slightly. Not from fear, but because something long buried had just been stirred. Something she had sealed away like a stone wedged in the doorway of memory. Elijah's words still echoed in her ears, refusing to fade. If you're still willing, I need you. I need my mother. In Loretta's memory, Elijah had once called her Ma, softly on a rainy afternoon. Back then, she pretended not to hear it, afraid she had imagined it. Afraid of being too happy, too soon. Afraid that the love she'd felt might be taken away again, like last time. And in the end, she did lose him. Yet today, that same boy, now a grown man, stood in the center of a courtroom and called her by the one name she had longed to hear, just one more time. Loretta didn't stand. She didn't cry. She didn't rush forward to embrace Elijah. Under the gaze of curious and emotional eyes, she let the moment belong to him. It was his choice, his courage, his truth dash. Dug up by his own hands, faced head-on and returned to her. As a gift, in a room built for accusations and sentencing, a plea for love had just been spoken aloud. And for the first time in years, Loretta no longer felt like she was sitting in the back row. She was sitting exactly where she was meant to be, beside the son she had never stopped loving. Judge Malcolm Avery sat quietly behind the elevated bench, his eyes still fixed on the woman seated in the back row. The woman who had just been called mother by her foster son in front of the entire courtroom. No one prompted him, no one dared interrupt that moment. Because everyone understood. What had just happened here had moved beyond the bounds of law. The judge adjusted his glasses, lowered his head to review the documents. But after only a few seconds, he set the file aside and spoke, slowly, hoarsely, as if dusting off something long buried in his mind. Your name is Loretta Sinclair, isn't it? Loretta gave a soft nod, her voice steady. Yes, Your Honor. He tilted his head slightly, frowning, then suddenly blinked, as if a memory had just broken through. He leaned on the bench, his eyes distant, uncertain. You used to live in the Jefferson district, didn't you? Near William Byrd Elementary. Loretta nodded again, this time with a hint of hesitation. I lived there for over 10 years. The judge took a deep breath, then slowly nodded in return. Back then, I wasn't a judge yet. I was living with my sister. She had a daughter, Jasmine. He paused. The room went completely still. Elijah looked up. Rachel Connors turned to face Loretta. A few whispers rose, "Jasmine, Jasmine Avery." The judge continued, his voice lower now, more reflective. "She lost her mother in a car accident. After that, she stopped speaking. For nearly a year, she didn't say a single word, just stared at people, silent. We took her to therapists, counselors, even prescribed medication. Nothing helped. Until one day, he gave a soft laugh, his eyes shimmering with something deeply personal. She came home, humming a melody we'd never heard. And that evening, just before dinner, for the first time in 10 months, she said, "I miss my mom." He looked up, this time meeting Loretta's eyes. Not with the gaze of a legal authority, but the look of someone who had carried a quiet, unspoken debt. "Jasmine told us there was a woman at school, a woman named Miss Loretta, who sat with her during lunch breaks, who hummed beside her, without pressing, without asking questions. The woman who gave my niece her voice back." Loretta remained seated, but her lips began to tremble. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Not out of sorrow, but because a memory she thought had long faded had just been called back to life. Through gratitude, she whispered, barely audible, "I remember Jasmine. She had a pink stuffed elephant. She couldn't sleep without it." Judge Avery smiled gently, placing his hand over his heart. "Exactly. That elephant still sits on her bed to this day." The entire courtroom seemed to exhale, as if time itself had softened for a beat. That moment, unexpected and deeply personal, transformed the cold, procedural courtroom into a space filled with memory, emotion, and quiet humanity. A woman once seen as a stranger in the wrong seat was now met with reverence because she hadn't just saved a child, she had saved many. And now, one of those children, Elijah Brooks, sat across from her, waiting to be called by the one name he'd never stopped needing, son. After a long silence, Judge Malcolm Avery slowly placed his hand on the surface of the old wooden bench. His fingers tapped a gentle rhythm, as though weighing not just a sentence, but a person. He didn't look at the case file again, didn't flip through any transcripts. Instead, he looked directly at Elijah Brooks, the young man who had just found the courage to say something most people wouldn't dare admit in a courtroom. That he needed a mother, that he had made mistakes, that he wasn't ready to give up. When the judge finally spoke, his voice no longer carried the cold formality of legal authority. It held sincerity, fatigue, and most of all, deep human understanding. "Elijah Brooks, you stand before this court today with a record marked by fractures. That much is true. But that record now holds something rare. The courage to name your vulnerability, the courage to reclaim a love that was once severed, and the courage to face yourself without blaming anyone else." Elijah lowered his head, his hands still locked tightly together. No one in the gallery moved a muscle. The judge continued, "This court does not turn a blind eye to wrongdoing, but neither is it blind to repentance, and above all, it should never be deaf to the quiet, honest voice of a child who was once left behind." He paused. Then clearly, firmly, without hesitation, he declared, "There will be no prison sentence." The courtroom stirred in hushed surprise. Elijah looked up. Attorney Rachel Connors nearly dropped her pen. Loretta, still seated in the back, clenched her hands tighter, but said nothing. The judge continued, "Instead, Elijah Brooks will enter a 6-month behavioral rehabilitation program, along with 200 hours of community service, preferably with programs mentoring at-risk youth or supporting children with trauma. Because if back then you needed someone and had no one, now you can be that someone a child is waiting for." The words did not land like a sentence, but like a door opening, not from law, but from grace. Judge Avery placed his hand over his heart, nodded once and said, "This court acknowledges your mistakes, but it also acknowledges this. You stood back up." When the court session ended, people began to stand, but no one left right away. Unlike most hearings, where people walk out relieved or frustrated, this time every step was slower, as if everyone needed a few extra seconds to process what had just happened. Elijah Brooks stood beside the defendant's table, his hands gripping his file, his eyes quietly following the crowd as they moved toward the exit. He knew he was free to leave. His attorney had already gone. The bailiff nodded, signaling he could go, but Elijah didn't move. Because he knew someone was still sitting there. Loretta Sinclair. She remained in the back row, didn't stand, didn't call out. She just watched him, with the gaze of someone who had waited for this moment. Half her life. Elijah slowly walked toward her, not rushing. Each step carried hesitation, shame, and most importantly, courage. When he stopped in front of her, only a few paces separated them. But it was the distance of more than 10 silent years. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. I came back. When I was 18, I stood at the gate, but you didn't come out. Loretta lowered her head. Her hands gently gripped her handbag, then slowly opened it. Deliberately, she pulled out an old, yellowed photograph, its corners curled from time. It was a photo of Elijah at 12, standing in her garden, wearing his blue hoodie. Beside him stood Loretta, her hands still dusted with pancake flour, smiling softly. She handed the photo to Elijah. Her voice, after all these years, was still as gentle as breath. I saw you from behind the window, but I was afraid. I thought, if you resented me, I wouldn't survive it. Elijah gripped the photo in his hand. He looked down, then up, and in his eyes, for the first time, was not the gaze of a man fighting to survive, but the child who had once lost his home, now slowly finding his way back. His voice cracked. I thought you didn't want to see me. Thought you didn't try to keep me. Thought you let me go. Loretta placed a hand over her chest, where her heart beat in slow, steady rhythm. I never let you go. I just didn't know if I still had the right to step outside. There, in the long courthouse corridor, bathed in sunlight spilling from the main doors, they stood face to face. An unfinished past and a present being stitched together, one quiet thread at a time. No one cried, no one hugged, not yet. Because in that moment, just standing there was enough. The hallway of Fayette County Courthouse was glowing with sunlight. The large front doors stood wide open, letting light flood across the tiled floor, casting long shadows from those passing by. And in that stream of light, two figures stood side by side, not touching, not speaking, with no explanations left to give. Elijah Brooks clutched the old photograph in his hand, as if letting go might let the memory slip away again. He didn't turn to look at Loretta, but he didn't walk away either. And Loretta Sinclair stood next to him silently, her face calm, hands resting on the handbag over her stomach, shoulders small and frail, but steady. Between them was a small space. Not far, but not close enough to embrace. And strangely, neither of them needed to take another step, because they both knew real love doesn't need to be touched to be felt. It doesn't rely on a hug. It doesn't demand an apology. It only needs one person to stay, and one person brave enough to come back. Passers-by walked past without noticing. A few young lawyers glanced at them, then bowed their heads and moved on, as if sensing that what was unfolding here was not meant for the crowd. This was a moment between two people, a sacred moment. Elijah spoke softly, almost as a breath. I don't know how to start over. Loretta didn't answer right away. She turned to him and looked long, not just at the 28-year-old man beside her, but through him, seeing again the 12-year-old boy who once curled up at her feet in the rain. And then she said, her voice low and warm, You've already started. You spoke. You came back. And I'm still here. Nothing more was needed. No proof, no conditions, no demand for a perfect past. And so they walked, together, not holding hands, no cameras, no applause from any audience, just the quiet rhythm of two footsteps echoing against old stone floors, the breeze gently lifting silver hair and sunlight resting softly on their shoulders. As if in quiet blessing. One had once been lost. One had once waited. Now neither was alone. 2 years had passed, as quick as a blink. But for Loretta Sinclair, it felt like a lifetime. A life lived again, not measured in time, but in meaning. Tonight, at a small community center in Eastside, warm golden lights glowed over rows of plain white-covered tables. Strings of twinkling bulbs crisscrossed the ceiling, casting a rustic, heartfelt charm over the room. No red carpet, no media presence, only real people. And real gratitude. This was the annual gala of Urban Youth Renewal, an organization supporting teenagers who had passed through the foster care system, or once had juvenile records, and this year's keynote speaker was none other than Elijah Brooks. He stepped onto the stage, wearing a simple white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing a faded tattoo on his forearm. A key. Once he had hated it. Now he wore it like a mark of a door he had once managed to unlock. The hall fell completely silent as he took the mic. Not because of fame, but because his voice carried something that made people want to listen. I'm not used to speaking in front of crowds. Light chuckles from the audience, but I was taught that some stories, if we don't tell them, no one will ever know they happened. I used to think I was just a mistake with a name on a file, a juvenile delinquent, a statistic in the system's failure reports. But when I was a kid, there was a woman. She wasn't magical, she wasn't wealthy, she didn't change the world. She just stayed. From the back row, Loretta sat quietly. Her hair had gone grayer, but her eyes still shone. She clutched her small clutch bag gently. Inside it, still tucked safely, was the old photo of Elijah at 12. Elijah looked straight at her. And this time, he didn't look away. Even when I was taken away, even when I went quiet, there was still a melody in my mind. The lullaby in the kitchen, the smell of slightly burnt pancakes, and someone who didn't need to be named, for me to know she was home. No one moved. A few eyes welled up. Someone wiped their glasses. A soft sob broke the stillness. She's here tonight. And if anyone wonders why I'm still standing, the answer is simple, because my mother never left. The entire room rose to their feet. Not for Elijah, but for the woman in the back of the room, the one who hadn't spoken for nearly 2 decades, but whose love had echoed further than any speech ever could. Loretta did not rise with them. She simply sat and let her tears fall. Not from sadness, but because she now knew love may be interrupted, but it never dies. The gala evening came to a close and people quietly made their way home. No loud chatter, no casual gossip, as if each person was carrying something far too personal, too sacred, something that words could only diminish. Loretta Sinclair also left earlier than usual. She didn't stay for tea, didn't shake hands, didn't stand beside Elijah for a group photo. Because for her, what needed to happen had already happened. In that single moment, when the boy who once vanished into the system stood before a room full of strangers and called her mother. That night, back at home, Loretta changed out of her navy dress and carefully hung it beside her old cardigan, the one she used to wear during the years Elijah lived with her. The house was quiet. Only the ticking of a clock echoed faintly from the corner. She walked to the small wooden table in the living room. Its surface was scratched, but the bottom drawer was always clean, because she had kept that space for memory. Loretta opened it. Inside was the same old photo. Elijah at 12 in his blue hoodie, standing in the garden, his expression awkward but bright. She took it out, and for the first time, it didn't hurt to look at it. Then, from her purse, she took out a new photo, taken 2 years ago outside the courthouse. In it, Elijah stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. Neither of them smiled widely, but their eyes were full of peace. She placed the 2 photos side by side, one from the past, one from the present. Both were true. Loretta sat down, her hand gently brushing the table's surface. She whispered, not for anyone to hear, but as if answering something deep inside herself. "You came back, and I never left." There were no spotlights, no awards, no articles written, no plaques or trophies. But she had something greater, a child once lost, who had found his way home. A love once silent, now reborn through action. A life once considered quiet, now revealed to have left a legacy that endures. Loretta Sinclair didn't need the world to know her name. She only needed one person to call her mother. And believe that love, when held long enough, does not disappear. It grows roots in silence, and one day, it blooms. There are mothers whose names never appear on birth certificates, no titles, no medals. They aren't mentioned at parent-teacher conferences, aren't thanked at graduation ceremonies, and sometimes they go years without even being called mom. But they stay, they remain quietly. In every early morning plate of pancakes, in every lullaby softly sung while folding laundry, in every gaze that never left the child they once reached out to hold. Even when the system took them away, even when life interrupted everything, Loretta Sinclair didn't save the world, but she kept one heart whole, so that one day, when that boy found his way back, he'd still have a place to call home. If you've ever known someone like Loretta, someone who never asked for recognition but simply hoped the person they loved would live a better life, please share this story. Someone out there might be waiting for a reason to come home, and maybe, just maybe, one story is all it takes to open the door they've kept shut their whole life. And if you believe that, love, even silent love, can change a life, leave us a comment. Tell us what this story meant to you, or simply write a thank you to the one you've called or never quite dared to call. Mom, thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, subscribe to the channel so we never miss the quiet souls who lived a great life in silence.